Abandoned. That was the word that clung to Anna like a shadow, the word that followed her wherever she went. A young woman carrying life inside her, yet thrown away as if she were nothing. It all began with one cruel sentence, sharp enough to cut her heart in two. "I'm not raising a poor man's baby." With those words, her husband turned his back and walked out of her life forever. He left her pregnant, helpless, and alone. What made the wound deeper was that her own family, those who should have held her when she broke, chose pride over love and cast her out too. Anna wandered the streets with nowhere to go. She had no home, no bed, no warm meal. The alleys became her shelter, the cold ground her mattress, and hunger her most constant companion. Every day was a fight against humiliation and despair. The market women tossed scraps her way only after mocking her swollen belly. Men averted their eyes, as though her misery might stain them too. Nights were colder than she could bear, and each morning she woke weaker than the last. Until finally, one morning at the pier, her body gave up. Her legs trembled, her vision blurred, and she collapsed to the wooden planks, unconscious. That moment could have been her end. But fate had a different plan, one that came quietly, without grand gestures, without the sound of trumpets. It came in the form of a man most people never even noticed. Thomas, the quiet fisherman. Thomas was a man apart. He had lived in that village all his life, yet he was almost invisible. At dawn, while the world still slept, he carried his narrow canoe to the water and rowed into the horizon. He spoke little, never joined the other men in laughter at the bar, and never wasted words in gossip. He lived in a small shack of weathered boards, alone since losing his wife many years ago. Villagers whispered that grief had silenced him forever, that he had never shown interest in another woman since. Some thought him strange, others pitied him, but most simply forgot he existed. But on the day Anna fell, Thomas noticed. He saw her crumpled figure on the pier, fragile as driftwood washed ashore. Without hesitation, he bent down, lifted her gently as though she were glass, and carried her in his arms. He said nothing. He asked nothing. He simply walked the long path back to his shack and laid her inside, where the salty wind whistled, through the cracks in the boards. He pointed toward a hammock swaying lightly and spoke just one sentence. "You can sleep here without fear." To anyone else, those words would have sounded ordinary. But to Anna, who had spent nights curling against cold walls, shaking from both hunger and fear, it felt like a promise, one she had longed to hear. The shack was small, almost bare. A tin stove stood in one corner with a dented pot resting on top. Fishing hooks hung neatly in a row, and a bucket of rainwater sat just by the door. There was nothing luxurious there, no comforts of wealth, yet it was warmer than any place Anna had known for months. For the first time, she laid her head down without the fear of being chased away or mocked for existing. And that night, she slept deeply, wrapped in the sound of the ocean instead of cruel words. When Anna awoke, light filtered softly through the gaps in the walls, painting golden stripes across the floor. Beside her hammock lay a cloth with freshly cleaned fish, Thomas's. Quiet offering asking for nothing in return. He wasn't there, but his care lingered in that simple gesture. The days that followed were marked by silence, but not the heavy silence of loneliness. Thomas's silence carried weight. He spoke rarely, only to point where things were kept or to ask if she needed food. Sometimes he would leave bread or fruit on the table before heading out to sea. He never pried, never demanded explanations. His quietness was not emptiness. It was understanding. And Anna, who had been hurt by two, many careless words, found comfort in that kind of silence. The village, however, noticed everything. They always did. Whispers began, as sharp and cutting as the knives used to clean fish. At first, it was just sideways glances when Anna passed through the market, the kind of looks that linger too long. But soon the whispers grew louder. They called her clever in the worst way, accusing her of taking advantage of a lonely man's kindness. Some said her pregnancy was nothing but a trap, a scheme to tie herself to the fisherman who asked for nothing. Others laughed that she had fallen into the dirt only to land safely in a man's house. Anna endured it in silence. She had learned that answering cruelty often feeds it. Still, their words stung like barbs beneath her skin. She would walk through the market clutching her belly, holding her head high, though inside she wanted to crumble. Once, on a rainy afternoon, a woman spat on the ground so close that the spray touched Anna's skirt. The insult was clear. Anna paused for a moment, met the woman's eyes, and saw the twisted satisfaction there, the joy of trying to shrink someone smaller than they already were. Without a word, Anna turned and walked away, carrying the sting with her but refusing to give them the victory of reaction. When she reached the shack that day, Thomas sat on the porch, mending his net. He looked up, saw the storm in her eyes, and said nothing. He simply went back to his work, offering his silence as a shield. That night, lying in the hammock, Anna thought of how he never cared for the village's gossip. Perhaps that was the secret, living as though their noise was nothing more than the sea wind, always present but never worth fighting. Slowly, she began to learn the same lesson. Day by day, she walked straighter, carrying her pain like armor, instead of chains. She understood that what truly disturbed the villagers was not her presence in Thomas's shack, but the fact that she had survived abandonment without breaking. In their eyes, she was supposed to disappear, to crumble into nothing. But here she was, standing, breathing, rebuilding. That was her quiet victory. And one morning, with the smell of grated coconut and caramelized sugar filling the little shack, Anna made a decision. She would not rely only on Thomas's catch. She would find her own way to stand again. The sweet, warm aroma spread through the air as her hands worked quickly, stirring the thick syrup and shaping small sweets onto banana leaves. The act was simple, but for Anna, it was proof that she still had strength inside her, strength to create, to provide, and to move forward. She shaped each sweet with care, letting them cool as the sea breeze slipped in through the cracks. And in that moment, she realized this was not just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming the dignity the world had tried to take from her. She placed them all in a basket covered with a clean cloth, tied a scarf around her head, and headed toward the village square where the crowd might guarantee her first sales. On the way, her heart beat faster. It wasn't just the hope of selling it. It was the fear of facing the same people who whispered about her in the market aisles. Still, she kept walking. Upon arriving at the square, she picked a spot in the shade of a mango tree, opened the cloth covering the basket, and arranged the cocadas, letting the sun catch the shimmer of the crystallized sugar. The first hours were slow. A few children passed by, stared curiously, but were pulled away by their mothers before they could ask the price. One or two men bought a piece more out of curiosity than hunger. Then a woman approached. Not just any woman, but one of the respected figures in the village, always seen in neatly pressed dresses and with fingers full of rings. She looked at the cocadas with a crooked smile and asked for the price. When she heard it, she let out a short, cutting laugh. Sweets from someone who can't even sweeten her own life. The words hit Anna like cold water. Some people around laughed. Others pretended not to hear, but the pain was the same. The wealthy woman walked away, and her comment lingered in the air, like the now sickly sweet smell of sugar. Anna took a deep breath, lowered her eyes, and began to pack the cucadas back into the basket. She didn't want anyone to see the tears. Forming, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing it hurt. She got home early that day, the basket nearly untouched. She sat quietly in a corner of the porch, staring at the sea without seeing it. Thomas, who was mending fishing hooks, glanced at her briefly but said nothing. Maybe he knew some battles have to be fought in silence before they can be shared. Anna stayed there, listening to the tide, feeling the weight of humiliation. But the next morning, something had shifted. Festing of the insult turned into resolve. Anna went back into the kitchen, lit the stove, and made the recipe again. This time, double dot. As she stirred the pot, she repeated to herself that no sharp tongue would kill the bit of hope she had fought to reclaim. She spent hours working, wrapping each card with even more care. When she returned to the square, she didn't stay hidden, in the shade. She took a spot right in the center where everyone passed. Some remembered the scene from the day before, but Anna didn't lower her gaze. She called the children by name, offered small samples, smiled at those who came near. Bit by bit, the cucatas began to sell. By the end of the day, the basket was empty. She walked home with the cloth folded neatly, and her heart full of a quiet kind of pride. The kind that doesn't need applause, just the certainty of having endured. Thomas, of a quiet kind of pride, the kind that doesn't need applause, just the certainty of having endured. Thomas, seeing her return, looked at the empty basket and gave a small nod. It was enough for Anna to know he understood everything, even without hearing the story, and in that moment she realized that dignity, like a fishing net, isn't built in a day. It takes patience to weave every knot, even when the wind feels like it's trying to tear the whole thing apart. The sea was calm that morning, as if it had decided to take a break from storms. Thomas left early, Ash always did, but this time he called for Anna. He didn't say much, just pointed to the edge of the canoe and said, "Come with me." Today, Anna hesitated. Her belly was heavy now, slowing her down, and the salty scent of the sea might bring on nausea. But there was something about his invitation that wasn't just about fishing. It felt like a call to learn something deeper. Beyond. The trade. She climbed into the canoe carefully, feeling the gentle sway of the wood over the water. Thomas pushed off, and soon they were gliding over the blue mirror that reflected the sky. He didn't speak, but now and then he pointed at a school of fish, the movement of the waves, the clouds gathering on the horizon. Anna began to notice that everything meant something. The wind, the color of the sea, even the silence of the birds told a story. After a while, Thomas picked up the net. It wasn't new. The threads were worn but sturdy, and each knot seemed to carry its own tale. He handed one end to Anna and began to explain. A net is like life. If you pull too hard, it tears. If you leave it too loose, the fish slip away. You have to know when to wait. The words echoed inside her. It wasn't just a lesson in fishing. It was a message about everything Anna was going through. Thomas showed her how to cast the net gently, how to feel its weight spreading across the water, and then how to pull it back in, not with force, but with steadiness. Rushing is the enemy of the fisherman, he said, eyes on the horizon and of life, too. Anna focused, repeating the movements, making mistakes, until finally she felt the resistance of something caught. With Thomas's help, she pulled up a few silver fish flickering in the sunlight. She couldn't help but smile. Back on shore, Thomas showed her how to clean the fish, how to set some aside to eat and some to sell. And before they parted ways that day, he placed the old net in her hands. It's not to carry weight, to learn how to wait. It was the first time he had given her something so personal. In the days that followed, Anna began to practice alone by the shore, casting and pulling the net. With each try, she felt she wasn't just fishing, she was stitching together a new piece of herself. She was learning to wait for the right moment to control her strength, to accept that you don't always bring in what you hoped for. At night, sitting on the porch, Anna would stare at the net hanging on a nail drying in the breeze. That image brought her peace. It was as if it whispered that everything in life has its own rhythm. And if you respect that rhythm, even pain can be woven into something that holds you up. Thomas, true to his nature, never praised or commented on her progress. He just watched sometimes, offering a short piece of advice, other times letting her figure things out on her own. And without realizing it, Anna began to trade the rush and despair she had carried since being abandoned for a new, kind of calm, one built knot by knot, patience by patience. The final weeks of pregnancy were marked by a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, but of waiting. Thomas, even without many words, noticed the change in Anna's rhythm. She walked more slowly, sat down more, often and sometimes closed her eyes for a few seconds, as if having quiet conversations with the baby growing inside her. Her belly, now heavy, pulled her forward, and the air grew thinner on uphill paths. Still, Anna kept helping sorting fish, cleaning the porch, cooking when the sea allowed. That morning, the sky was clear, but the wind was strong. Anna woke before Thomas and sat in the hammock, feeling cramps stronger than usual come and go. She didn't say anything at first, trying to ignore them, but when a deeper pain made her double over, Thomas noticed. He didn't ask if it was time. He just grabbed his hat, left, and returned minutes later with Mrs. Helen. The Ville's eldest midwife, a woman with steady hands and deep eyes who needed no fancy tools to know what was happening with a mother, thought the birth happened right there, in the shack, with the sound of waves crashing in the background. Mrs. Helen gave short, clear instructions, and Thomas stayed close, bringing water, adjusting the light, blocking the wind that slipped in through the cracks. The pain came in waves, stealing Anna's breath, and she clung to the fabric of the hammock like she could hold on to life itself. Between screams and stillness, the smell of the sea mixed with the sweat pouring down her face. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, it was as if the very walls exhaled with her. Mrs. Helen placed the boy in her arms, and the warmth of that tiny, damp, fragile body brought Anna a peace she had never felt before. She cried, not from sadness, but from a deep relief that seemed to wash away everything she had carried until then. Thomas approached slowly, looked at the baby, and said in a low but steady voice, "Now you have two hearts, one inside you and one outside." The words stayed with her like a quiet promise that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, the whole village heard about the birth. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine care. The same women who once whispered now approached looking at the baby now named Lucas, with a mix of wonder and silent evaluation, and Anna holding Lucas in her arms, felt that in some way each glance was a confirmation that she had endured justice invisible and slow began there. It wasn't a punishment for those who had abandoned or humiliated her, but a living, breathing proof that Anna had not only survived, she had one. Lucas, healthy and strong, grew quickly, and each of his smiles felt like life quietly giving. Her change back. Thomas carried on at his same steady pace, going out to sea, returning with fish, tending to the house. But slowly he stopped being just the man who offered her shelter and became the safe harbor for a family without needing papers or promises. His place beside Anna and Lucas was sealed in the routine, in the care, in his constant presence. And so, between Lucas's cries and the sound of nets drying in the wind, Anna began to understand something. Sometimes justice comes so simply it goes unnoticed by those who only believe in loud victories. But for those who carry the memory of pain, every peaceful sunrise is a sentence fulfilled. Time passed and Lucas was already taking his first steps, stumbling around the shack's yard, laughing at the waves as if he saw in them some kind of playful game. Life, though simple, had found a peaceful rhythm. Thomas tended to the sea. Anna cared for the house and helped sell the fish. Some of the village women, once so sharp-tongued, now spoke to Anna with more warmth, as if time had washed away their old judgments. It was on a hot afternoon when the sun seemed to push everything into the shadows that Victor showed up. The man who had once turned his back on honor and on his son. The same one who had said, without blinking, that he wouldn't raise a poor woman's child. He came dressed in expensive clothes, polished shoes, and a watch that gleamed on his wrist. His face wore a smile not of remorse, but of someone who believed he had the right to show up and take whatever he wanted. He found Anna at the edge of the market, helping organize a basket of fresh fish. Victor approached slowly, as if it were a casual reunion, and said, "You look different. I see you managed all right." Anna held her gaze steady, though her heart quickened. It wasn't fear. It was the bitter stir of painful memories and anger she thought she had buried. Victor got straight to the point. He said he wanted to give Lucas a real future, that he could take him to live with him, give him an education, nice clothes, everything a child deserves. Ash spoke. He pulled a thick envelope of cash from his pocket and placed it on the stand as if this were a simple business transaction. "You can keep the money. It's better for everyone." Victor's words sliced through the air like a knife. There was no request, not even a gesture of acknowledgement. It was as if he were trying to buy an object, something without a soul, without a story. Anna felt the heat rise to her face, not from shame, but from sheer indignation. She looked at the envelope, then at Victor, and replied calmly, but with a firmness drawn from every pain she had ever endured. "My son already has a father, and he doesn't wear a suit." The silence that followed was heavy. Victor tried to laugh, but the sound came out dry, awkward. He picked up the envelope, straightened his collar, and muttered something about thinking about the boy's future. But Anna had already turned her back, walking down the road that led home. When she reached the shack, she found Thomas on the porch cleaning hooks. Anna didn't tell him what had happened. There was no need. Maybe he already knew. By the way, she held Lucas in her arms as if to reaffirm that nothing and no one would take him away. In the days that followed, Victor's visit became the talk of the village. Some said he truly wanted what was best for Lucas. Others whispered that after a string of personal troubles, he needed to show his new wife he could take responsibility. To Anna, none of that mattered. Fate had already made its choice. Lucas would grow up beside the man who had been there from his very first breath, and deep down Anna knew this wasn't a gesture of love. It was a test. One of those moments when life places us faced with our past to see if we still fear it, and this time, she didn't. The seasons changed, and with them, so did the mood of the sea. One heavy afternoon, the sky darkened as if night had fallen before the sun could set. The wind came first, cutting through the air, lifting dust from the village's narrow streets. Then came the rain, thick, relentless with thunder that made windows rattle. In just a few hours, the street market was in shambles. Canvas tents flew. Crates of fruit rolled through the flood, and the strong stench of spoiled fish began to spread. The days that followed were even harsher. The sea, furious and wild, wouldn't let the fishermen sail. Boats rocked violently against their moorings, and muddy water flooded the docks. Fish became rare and expensive, and those who depended on it to eat felt the pangs of hunger earlier each day. Entire families stared into nearly empty pots, and even the marketplace echoed with a different silence, the silence of need. It was Thomas who had the idea. He said they couldn't wait for the sea to command that they had more than enough food stored. Anna understood immediately what he meant. They spent the night sorting and cleaning well-preserved, salted fish, cooking, some, saving others to roast. By morning, they had built a simple tent in front of the shack using wood scraps and old canvas. There, they set up a large makeshift stove, steaming pots, and a smell of food that spread through the damp air. The news spread fast. Children came first, curious about the activity. Then women with babies in their arms, men with hunger in their eyes. Some arrived quietly, almost ashamed, asking only for a bit if he can. Others didn't bother to hide their urgency, approaching quickly, afraid the food would run out. And then came those who months earlier had spat near Anna in the market, laughed at her coucard. They came with slow steps, avoiding eye contact, holding out their hands in silence. Anna served everyone, making no distinction between friend and former foe. Every plate was the same: fresh fish, fina, and when possible, a bit of fruit for the children. Thomas kept the fire going and helped keep the line in order. But it was Anna who served. Harry's met those of each person she fed, and in them was something that went beyond food silent, recognition that time had flipped the roles. The whispers from the past had fallen silent before the full plates she now offered. These shared meals went on until the sea allowed fishing to resume. Some tried to pay, offering a few coins or bartering with what they had. But Anna always replied, "What saves us in the storm isn't for sale." That simple phrase, spoken softly, began to circulate through the village, repeated by those who had felt hunger and found relief beneath that improvised tent. When the market reopened, life seemed to return to its rhythm. But there was something different in the air. The same people who once avoided Anna now greeted her with longer nods, shy smiles, or even a good morning that hadn't existed before. Anna never expected gratitude, but she knew she had planted something deeper than the memory of a warm meal, and deep down she understood that what she had gained was a kind of victory that money could never buy. Because feeding those who had once rejected her wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. That strength, to not let bitterness dry out the heart. Time moved like the tides, and Lucas, once so fragile in Anna's arms, was now running through the sandy streets of the village. He had an easy smile and sharp eyes, the kind that held both the curiosity of childhood and the quiet wisdom learned from a life spent between sea and shore. At just 7 years old, he was already helping Thomas organize the nets. Even if his small hands couldn't do much, he loved hearing fishing stories. The old tales Thomas told while mending the knots. With Anna, he learned about patience, about preparing food, and about treating people with respect, even when the world didn't return it in kind. At the village school, Lucas was known for being polite and observant. He didn't get into playground fights, but stood up for classmates whenever he saw something unfair. One day, the teacher asked the class to write an essay with the theme, "Who is my hero?" It was a simple assignment meant to spark imagination, but for Lucas, it wasn't fiction. Heck knew exactly who his heroes were, and he didn't need long to decide what to write. On a lined notebook page, with shaky letters and a few misspellings, he began, "My mom fished me out of abandonment, and the fisherman taught me how to swim." The sentence, short and direct, carried the weight and beauty of his young life. Throughout the essay, he explained how Anna never let him go without love, even when there wasn't always enough food, and how Thomas taught him things that went far beyond catching fish. He taught him to wait, not to fear silence, and to understand that good things arrive in their own time. When he turned in the notebook, Lucas had no idea how much his words would touch others. The teacher, reading his essay, felt her eyes burn with tears. She saved it for last, as if wanting to linger in that story a little longer. The next day, she asked the class for permission to read it aloud. The room fell completely silent. The children, usually loud and easily distracted, listened to every word like they were hearing something rare. When she finished, the teacher took a deep breath and said, "Some stories remind us that heroes don't wear capes." There was no applause, but many eyes glistened, including hers. The story of the essay spread through the school and reached the principal, who decided to frame it and hang it at the entrance so everyone who passed by could read it. When Anna saw her son's words on display, she felt a mix of pride and emotion. She couldn't hide. It wasn't just the fact that Lucas had recognized her, was the certainty that even at such a young age, he understood the value of dignity and the love built through small things. When Thomas was shown the framed piece, he read it in silence, ran a hand through his beard, and simply said, "That boy knows how to cast a net." The essay didn't bring riches, didn't change the fate of the village, but it deepened the bond between the three of them, and in its own quiet way. It became a kind of testimony, a reminder to everyone that true greatness often hides in simple gestures and in the bonds that survived the fiercest storms. It was Sunday morning, and the village woke to the sound of church bells calling for service. The air smelled of fresh bread and just brewed coffee while families walked down the dirt streets toward the small white-walled church. Inside, the wooden pews were nearly full, and the breeze drifting through the open windows made the curtains sway gently. Anna rarely missed a service, but she always kept to herself. She sat in the back beside Thomas and Lucas, listening quietly, never drawing attention. But that day something was different. After reading a psalm about strength and perseverance, the pastor looked toward the back of the church and said, "Today, I'd like to invite our sister to come forward and share her testimony." For a moment, Anna's heart seemed to stop. She wasn't ready to speak, much less to revisit in front of everyone. The pain she had carried, her hands began to sweat. But when she looked at Thomas, she saw the same calm gaze as always, Asif silently saying, "Go. This is your story." Anna stood slowly, walking down the narrow aisle, feeling the eyes that followed her. Some were curious, others moved. When she reached the pulpit, she held the microphone with both hands, took a deep breath, and let silence settle before speaking. Her voice came out steady, though soft. "I was an empty shell, no family, no home, no hope. But God sent a simple man who fished my soul from the depths." The words echoed through the church, and for a moment noon moved. Anna spoke without embellishment about how Victor had left her, how she'd slept under a top, and how she'd been humiliated by neighbors and strangers. But she also told of the day she fainted from hunger and woke under the shade offered by a stranger who over time became her anchor in safe harbor. Thomas Anna didn't cry. Yes, there were tears just beneath the surface, but they weren't of sadness. They were of gratitude. Each word carried truth, and so they needed no decoration. She told how Thomas taught her to wait, how he held her hands during childbirth, how together they fed the village when the storm left everyone hungry. When she finished, there was no applause, only a deep silence, the kind that says more than any sound could. The pastor, eyes brimming, offered a short prayer. No one spoke after her because there was nothing that needed to be said. People remained, seated for a while longer, as if they wanted to hold on to that moment before returning to the outside world. On the way out, some of the women who had once avoided Anna approached her. They didn't say sorry in so many words, but the longer handshakes and steady eye contact said enough for Anna. That was more than enough. She didn't need the words to know something had changed. And that night, lying in the hammock, Anna stared up at the ceiling and felt that her story no longer belonged to her alone. It had become a thread woven into the memory of that community, a living example, that dignity and faith. When they meet, can rebuild even the most fragile foundations. The years passed like the wind that blows steadily along these ashore, shaping faces, hair, even the way people walk. Lucas was now grown, helping with chores with the ease of someone who had learned early on to respect the rhythm of the sea and of life. Thomas, though still strong, had begun to show the weariness of a man who had spent decades waking before dawn, braving waves and storms. His steps had slowed, and his callous hands carried a new stiffness, the mark of a lifetime of labor. He had never been one to speak much about himself. But Anna noticed something was changing. He spent more time sitting on the porch, eyes on the horizon, as if waiting for some answer to drift in from afar. He still went fishing, but only on calm days, avoiding the rough seas he once faced, without hesitation. One clear afternoon, while Lucas was at school, Thomas called for Anna. Seated in the shade, he had across his lap the oldest net he owned. The threads were no longer firm, and some of the knots were worn. But this wasn't just any net. Dot. It was the first one he had ever made, decades ago, when he was still learning from his father. "This net has caught more than fish," he said, running his hand over the knots as if caressing old memories. "It caught my reason for living." Anna stepped closer, feeling the weight of words. That sounded like a goodbye. Then he placed the net in her hands. "It's yours now, not for fishing, but for remembering." The weight of that gesture wasn't in the threads, but in what it represented. It was the handing over of a piece of life, of history, of everything they had built together. Anna held the net carefully, as if it might unravel if not treated with the respect it deserved. For a moment, she couldn't respond. She just looked at Thomas, and in that silence everything was said as the days passed. Thomas's health began to fade. There was no sudden illness, just a body quietly giving way to time. He remained on the porch, watching the sea, and sometimes smiled. At the sight of Lucas handling the new nets, repeating the motions he himself had once taught. And then, on a calm morning, Thomas passed just as silently as he had lived. The grief was deep, but not desperate. There was sorrow, yes, but also the quiet certainty that he had fulfilled his journey. Dot. The day after the funeral, Anna hung the old net on the porch, not as decoration, but as a silent elterer, daily reminder that patience, care, and true love are threads that, when well woven, withstand even the fiercest storms. Dot the net, swaying in the breeze, became part of the landscape. Those who passed by the house felt something different. Some said it was just the scent of the sea, but others swore there was a special kind of breeze there, as if dignity had made its home in that wood and cloth. And deep down, Anna knew as long as that net remained, their story would never be forgotten. Time moved on, as it always does, carrying away familiar faces and bringing in new ones. Life in the village returned to its usual rhythm. Boats setting out before sunrise, barefoot children running through the sand, the church bell marking the hours. But in that simple house by the sea, nothing was quite the same. Thomas's absence lingered in every corner, in the quiet of the porch. At dusk, in the missing sound of nets being hauled in the empty space beside the stove, and yet his presence still lived on. The net hanging where he'd left it continued to sway in the wind, as if it breathed with the house itself. Dot to Anna. It was more than a keepsake. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, not just as companions, but as a family, formed in the heat of hardship and shaped by patience. Often at sunset, she would sit facing the net and feel the wind brush her face like a silent message. You're not alone. As the months passed, Anna found a new purpose. She began to teach other women who had been abandoned widows, single mothers, young girls who had arrived in the village, running from stories they preferred not to tell. She taught them how to fish and how to weave using the techniques Thomas had once shared with her, adapting them to each woman's hands, to their pace, to their strength. Dot in the backyard, she set up a small improvised workshop filled with nets, thread, and needles, where conversation flowed freely as the work moved along. Lucas, now older, helped where he could. He had inherited not just Thomas's calm demeanor, but also the steady strength in his eyes. He grew up knowing, without anyone, needing to explain that a father is someone who stays. When he spoke of Thomas, it was always naturally because for Lucas, there was no question. The man who had once abandoned Anna never returned. No letters, no surprise visits, no messages through others. Dot. And to Anna, that wasn't a source of bitterness. The past had done its part and no longer held any power over the present. The justice she'd hoped for hadn't come in the form of public disgrace or revenge, but in something far simpler. A life built solid, surrounded by respect and love. Thomas's net still hung on the porch like a quiet altar, visible to anyone passing by. Many said they felt a different kind of breeze as they walked past the house. Some believed it was just the sea wind, but others swore there was something more in air, almost invisible, that carried a sense of peace and dignity. And so in that wooden house where once the smell of fresh fish mixed with the scent of hope, life carried on. There was no wealth. But there was something many spend a lifetime searching for and never find. The certainty that true love and genuine care leave marks that neither time nor absence nor death can ever erase. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our community.